Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Krishan Trotman, and I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural event of Blackademics presented by Legacy Lit in partnership with Hachette Academic. Legacy Lit is an imprint of Hachette Book Group dedicated to publishing and championing diverse and powerful literature. To that end, this series will foster ongoing conversations between academics, creating a dynamic space for intellectual exchange and for their work to grow in classrooms around the nation. Tonight's conversation is entitled The State of Black Education and features John B. King Jr. in conversation with Karida L. Brown, moderated by author Philip V. McHarris. Philip V. McHarris is the author of Beyond Policing and assistant professor in the Frederick Douglass Institute and Department of Black Studies at the University of Rochester. McHarris has a presidential postdoctoral research fellow. Was a presidential postdoctoral research fellow at Princeton University in the Department of African American Studies and the Ida B. Wells Just Data Lab. He earned his PhD in sociology and African American studies at Yale University. He was named one of the Root 100's most influential African Americans. McHarris has appeared on MSNBC, CNN, and PBS, and in the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Guardian, and more. Karida L. Brown is an NAACP Image Award-winning author and public intellectual, a professor at Emory University. Brown is a leading scholar of systemic racism and the study of Black life. Her work, which spans over a decade of groundbreaking research and analysis, has earned her both national and international acclaim. She is the author of The Battle for the Black Mind and also the co-author for the New Brownies book, A Love Letter to Black Families, continuing the legacy of W.E.B. Du Bois by centering Black narratives and empowering Black futures. John B. King Jr. served in President Barack Obama's cabinet as the 10th U.S. Secretary of Education. Over the course of his extensive and influential career in public education, he has been a high school social studies teacher, a middle school principal, the first African American and Puerto Rican to serve as New York State Education Commissioner, a college professor, and the president and CEO of Education Trust, a national education civil rights organization. King is currently the Chancellor of State University of New York, the nation's largest comprehensive system of public higher education. Both King's parents were career New York City public school educators. He lives in Brooklyn, New York, with his wife, an education researcher and former teacher, and his two daughters. And lastly, John B. King Jr. served in President Barack Obama's cabinet as the 10th. I think I said that already. So I'm just really happy to have you all here and to launch this wonderful event. I hope that you are active and engaged in the chat. We cannot wait for our presenters to answer your questions and for us to have a great conversation about the state of education, which I think is really important. And as the founder of Legacy Lit and publisher, I was really excited to launch this event just for you. So please take advantage and engage the attendees and just reach out to Legacy Lit afterwards with your thoughts and any questions, and let's get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Celia Monroe, and I am the marketing manager for Hachette Academic, which is a division of Hachette Book Group. And that means I work across all imprints at Hachette and specifically with universities to get our books in the hands of students and educators like yourself. So I just want to speak for a little bit. I'm really excited to be partnering with Legacy Lit on this event and the Blackademics series. And I just want to make sure really quick at the end of the event that you guys have everything you need to get in touch with us afterwards, and specifically to request any of these books for review for your courses if you are planning on teaching any of these books in an upcoming course of yours. So we have a couple of links that are going to be shared on screen and in your chats just for you to get more information. One is learn more about Hachette Academic. This has all of our contact information, links to our websites, our catalogs, newsletter signups, social media, everything you need to stay connected and to learn more about our events. It also has all of the book information for all the books you're going to hear about and how to request those exam copy requests for review. And it also has information on another upcoming virtual event of ours. So just want to make sure you save that link, make sure you have all that information. And I also want to briefly talk about the other link, our exam and desk copy request form. This is on our website. It's super easy to fill out. You just have to fill it out with your name, your university information, and your course information, which I really hope you'll be doing after this event so that you can request copies of these books. We'll send them directly to you. And if you need a digital copy, we also do that through vitalsource.com. I also just want to take a brief moment to highlight our program. We work really closely with the Hachette Speakers Bureau. So if you are interested in bringing any of our authors to your campus for a keynote, a lecture series, or any other event that you have on campus, feel free to reach out to us or reach out to our Hachette Speakers Bureau team. We'd really love to partner with you. And lastly, I just want to talk as well about our first year experience and common reading program. If any of you are educators on a first year experience committee and you are interested in using any of these books for your program, we have lots of information again in that packet in the link about our first year experience program, our catalog, any of these books. And again, if you want to request a review copy for you or your committee, you can do that through our form. Finally, I just want to talk about an upcoming event. If you really enjoyed this event and you're like, hey, I want to learn more about Hachette authors and hear more, we have a first year experience event on Thursday, October 16th at 2 p.m. It's also virtual. It's also an author event. You can RSVP again with the link in the packet. So I really hope you save all this information and you really reach out and get in touch with us. We would really love to work with all of you, and we're really glad you came out for this event. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our lovely authors that you came to hear from today, Philip, Karida, and John. Thank you so much.
Hello, hello. Thank you for that, Celia and Krishan. I'm very honored to be here moderating this inaugural Blackademics event with these two incredible thinkers whose work is really shaping how we understand Black education today. And tonight we'll explore the state of Black education in this critical moment, and it surely is a critical moment, but historically, politically, and socially, and reflect on how we can push towards a more just future. And I'm very eager, very excited, as I mentioned, to engage in this conversation. And I just wanted to start with, with a bit of scene setting, and just to set the current context. And so for this, first question, I wanted to ask you both, with book bans, attacks on public schools, defunding of race-conscious education, and even moves to dismantle the Department of Education, schools serving predominantly Black students are most impacted. And so how are you both seeing this play out right now?
Defer to Karida to start. Ladies first.
So, thank you, Philip. I see this happening at the ecosystem level. And I think that's what's one thing that I want us all to hold on to. While the book bans are super important, we need to be paying attention to that at the state and local level. While the attack and sometimes ban on certain aspects of a curricula, for example, critical race theory, are happening, sometimes those operate as red herrings, where we're paying attention to one or two attacks and not looking at the whole ecosystem, where what's really happening right now is an attack on the entire knowledge infrastructure of the United States. And if we frame it that way, then we're looking at what's going on at the curricular level. We're looking at what's going on with book bans, but we're also looking at what's happening to our national databases that allow us to study inequity and make policy recommendations to redress that. We're also looking at our museums and libraries, all the institutions that work together in a knowledge ecosystem to deliver quality education to all children and learners in the country.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I just build on that to say I think there's also an attack on the legacy of the civil rights movement, and whether it's the attacks we're seeing in an education context or in a uh, criminal justice context or a housing context, you see this effort to undo what we had come to think of as just fundamental protections of our society. So if you think about the Title I program, that's really an outgrowth of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. It was a civil rights law. So when you undermine that pillar of public education, you're undermining the legacy of the civil rights movement. When you see this attack on teaching the truth about our history in our schools, or the attack on the Smithsonian, that is about undoing the progress we've made in telling a fuller, more accurate story of American history. So I'm very worried, and I think we should also be disappointed that there isn't more outrage and organizing. There's these horrible attacks taking place, and generally it's a very quiet time. Folks are not out protesting. Folks are not organizing in the way that we would hope, given the scale of the threat.
Mm. Yeah, I think that was very helpful framing for the conversation. I just want to, piggyback on this line of thought. And one of the things, linking this macro to like the micro, I'm curious if you all are seeing, what this means for the day-to-day experiences of Black students and educators, like really thinking about those everyday experiences and linking all of that. Like, are you seeing any trends or patterns emerge?
I can tell you that, I've been a college professor for a little over a decade. I've had the honor and pleasure of teaching over 1,500 undergrad students at UCLA and at my current university, Emory University. And I can tell you that students, irrespective of their race or ethnicity, they want to know the truth about their history. They want to know the truth about, and not only their history, history writ large, and how society works, why these inequities appear and reproduce themselves in the way that they do. And that desire and drive to want to be informed has not changed. But what has happened is that there is an overwhelming, just like miasma of fear.
Mm.
Fear amongst students, and I'll give you an example. Last semester, I had a student ask in front of the entire class, Dr. Brown, are they going to come take you out of the class? Are they going to let you keep teaching? Because I do teach all the classes on race and ethnicity. I do teach the classes on racial capitalism. And while it's my job as an educator to give uh, our youth hope, I'm not going to lie to them. And my answer was, young students, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to let me continue teaching what I teach, but I'll promise you this. They will have to come drag my body out of this classroom in front of all of you before I just consent to, just giving up on our shared education, on your right to knowledge and the truth. But again, I want to emphasize that feeling of fear is not just amongst the students. I'm hearing it amongst fellow educators. I'm hearing it amongst parents, librarians, archivists. And I think this goes to John's point with the seeming lack of organized effort for resistance. Um, Folks are feeling isolated in this struggle in a way that can be disempowering, which is why I wrote The Battle for the Black Mind, because our power sometimes is like laden in our stories, and we need to be reminding ourselves of the history of the civil rights movement, of the history of our ancestors and elders, of the history of what Black educators have done historically to shore up the bag and make sure that we're still thriving irrespective of what's going on.
That's very well said, Karida. I worry that young people are getting a message of being devalued in our society. When you have the Supreme Court in a case like the SFFA case, basically tell Black and Latino young people that they are not wanted in higher education, right? That's the core message there, to say the Supreme Court is going to bless the dismantling of race conscious admissions. That's a message of not welcoming students of color. When you have the administration issuing an executive order that attacks diversity, equity, inclusion, whether it's legal or not, and I believe it is not, but nonetheless, it sends a message that the White House does not see diversity on our campuses as valuable. When you have the dismantling of the education department, whose core function is about equity and always has been, that is a message to young people and their families, whether we're talking about K-12 or higher ed, that they're not valued. And so I think as educators, we now have a special responsibility in this moment to say to our young people, yes, you are valued. Yes, we do believe in you. Yes, we do want to see you succeed. And we're going to keep finding ways. And, Karida tells this story very effectively in her book. We have a tradition within the African American community of finding ways around these institutional obstacles. We feel an obligation, a moral obligation to our young people, and so we make a way out of no way, and we find ways to deliver those excellent educational opportunities, and that's even more urgent in this moment.
Yeah, thank you both for that insight. And I'm also very glad that you both talked about organizing and thinking about what it looks like to push back against these different restructuring and attacks. And I'm excited to engage in that discussion. But I first want to just do a bit of historical contextualizing as well, which you both do in both of your books. And so, of course, many of these obstacles and challenges aren't new. And as you both mentioned, there's a long history of struggle for Black education in America. I just want to ask, why does that history still matter so much today? And why has Black education been such a target and focus?
That history matters so much today because that's the blueprint. That's the playbook. African Americans in these United States during slavery times were not allowed to even learn how to read and write. Okay, that was against the law, written into the code of state legislatures, penalties of fines or death to learn. That means that our oppressors understood all too well that knowledge is power. But who knew that from an epigenetic level? Black people, because they were kept out of accessing that very important tool that would be necessary for our liberation, for fortifying our communities. So when you ask why that knowing the history of Black education is important, it's important to know that our ancestors died for us to be able to have the access that we do today. It's important to note that by 1865, when the Emancipation Proclamation was instituted, 90% of Black Americans were illiterate. That means that 9 out of every 10 African Americans that you passed by could not sign their name to a check. By 1900, just 3 decades later, that literacy rate had dropped to 46%, meaning that over half of African Americans could learn how to read. That was by virtue of our thirst, our quest to acquire knowledge and education. African Americans have always valued education. So when you ask why is it important, when you start to know this history and also know the stories of the people who laid it all on the court to make sure that the relay would be assured for all of us, for me and you today, then you show up differently. You act a little bit different. You have a little bit more pride and pep in your step and dignity. And then you also understand that democracy is not something that just falls in our laps. It's something that we have to do every day. We have to do democracy.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully we can draw hope and strength from that history. In my book, Teacher by Teacher, is very focused on individual teachers, but I talk about there are many different kinds of teachers that you can encounter. And I talk in the book about the lessons that I draw from my ancestors. I tell the story of how I discovered when I was Secretary of Education that the University of Maryland Eastern Shore identified that my grandmother had graduated from there in 1894. And they reached out to me to speak at the commencement. And through that, I ended up on a journey that allowed me to discover the place where my great grandfather was enslaved. So, in preparation for the speech, I decided to do this family research project. Found the place where my great grandfather had been enslaved. Think about great grandfather's not very far, right? There's somebody being babysat right now by their great grandfather. So that's a reminder of how close we are to the institution of slavery. I found out where it was. It was just 25 miles from my house. And the property still owned to this day by the family that are direct line descendants of the family that enslaved my family. And the cabin that my great grandfather and his family lived in as enslaved people is still standing on the property. And I talk about the power of being able to stand inside of that cabin, because we all know there's this slavery connection, but you don't necessarily know that you're going to be in the place. And part of the power of standing inside of that cabin is the recognition of the cruelty and intimacy of the institution of slavery. That cabin is about 30 feet from the main house. So when you're standing inside of it, you're deeply conscious that this was two families living in the same space, one owning the other. But the other thing that was so powerful for me and for my family about that experience was reflecting on the fact that in our family, we went in 3 generations from enslaved in that cabin to serving in the cabinet of the first Black president. And that says something about, to Karida's point, our resilience and perseverance through extraordinary struggles, right? I exist today because my ancestors survived. They lived with faith in a future they could not see. And so then when you consider our current moment, and I hear people say, kind of throw up their hands in response to the current moment, and my reaction is, we have been through worse. We have persevered through worse. And we should see understanding our history as a strength that we can draw from.
Very, very informative and very insightful. And, I want to also just go into a question about something you both mentioned a little earlier. So historically, also, one of the things we saw is always this dynamic between, advocating and organizing for different kinds of institutional resources, restructuring around education, desegregation, and as you both mentioned, these forms of education outside of formal institutions. I think in this contemporary moment, a lot of people are seeing everything happening, and as you both mentioned earlier, like it's trying to figure out how to engage those two dynamics, right? And so I'm wondering if there are any historical lessons that you all have seen, and that really jump out for how we can think about this contemporary moment where there are these different institutional challenges and obstacles, but we also know that there's this rich legacy of educating Black minds outside of classrooms. So I'm really eager to hear you both talk about that.
Lucy Craft Laney, born in Georgia in the 1850s. She wasn't enslaved because her parents managed to buy their freedom from the people who enslaved them. What that meant for Lucy is that she was able to learn to read and write. She was able to attend school as a young girl, unlike 99% of her African American peers. Well, Lucy Craft Laney became one of the members of the first graduating class of Atlanta University, which is now Clark Atlanta University. and she became a teacher. 10 years of teaching in the Georgia public school system. And what she took away from that experience is that at that time, Black minds were not yet safe in the hands of the state. Remember, this is Jim Crow. The state is trying to deliver not only a separate and unequal education, but one that is wholly inferior. And because Lucy had experienced a quality education herself, she knew what the possibilities could be. So what she do? She didn't sit there rolling on the floor, whining and complaining or giving up. She founded her own school, a private school, an independent school, and developed a curricula that attended to the whole child. Her motto was head, hand, and heart. Her school grows from a church basement to 2 blocks of downtown Augusta. Her Haynes Institute stood, offering courses from kindergarten through high school. She then builds the very first Black nursing school in the state of Georgia because African Americans could not access the healthcare system in the state. And it wasn't just the reading, writing, and arithmetic. Miss Lucy was attending to the whole child, to their character, insisting that they be leaders in the community, insisting that when they got those degrees, they would spin the block and bring those resources and opportunities back to their communities. And this is instructive for us today. Maybe we're not founding our own institutes. Maybe some of us are, but could we be having freedom schools on Saturdays in our own community? Could we be, with all the knowledge and the reservoir of resources that we have just right here on this call, what could we be doing for after school programming or digital learning models or whatever we could do to show up for our community in organized ways using the resources that we have right at our fingertips? Because I'm sure we have more than what Miss Lucy had back then, and she accomplished the wholly impossible. We've got that in our DNA. We can pull that out today.
And we've got institutions around the country that are doing that. I mean, you think about what HBCUs mean for our community. You think about what some of the K-12 schools around the country that have been created with intentionality about trying to provide a path to opportunity for students who have not had that. I tell the story in my book of starting a school in Boston, in Roxbury, the traditionally, historically African-American section of the city. And what we wanted to do is make sure that every student who graduated from Roxbury Prep was prepared for college, because we looked at the data and only 9% of the adults in the community had college degrees. And we understood that starting with middle school, you could try to shift that trajectory. And in organizing the school, we looked to the history that Karida was describing. We looked to this very long tradition of creating alternative institutions that put opportunity for our kids first. And we have even more need, I think, in this moment to invest in those institutions, to lift up those institutions, to create more of those institutions, and to realize that the mission has to be both helping young people have a strong sense of self and of history and positive identity, and academic excellence, and that we are going to do those together, and that's the tradition we've been a part of.
Appreciate both of you sharing that. I actually went to Boston College for undergrad, and I had a lot of friends that went to Roxbury Prep. So I'm not.
Is that right? Nice.
Yeah. Thank you both for that. And also, I just want to mention there's a Q&A box, so feel free to put some questions in there, and around 6:50, I'll field those. All right, so I want to shift and just think about like books, right? And so, I think all of our books, are meant to be more than just shelf titles, but be used as teaching tools. And so when you think about the Black mind, teaching, education, how do we think about the history of Black authorship and Black books?
John, I'm going to let you start on that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I think about the tradition of African American educators telling their story in ways that are intended to inspire. I think about Du Bois, and he's sharing not only kind of a set of thoughts about society and souls of Black folk, but he's also sharing his own experience as an educator. And I tried in my book not to make it a policy book, especially having served in government. A lot of people leave government and they write these books that I think are almost like an infomercial, and they're not honest, and they aren't real. They're not about kind of real human stories. They're sort of airbrushed, and I wanted to actually have a more honest account of my own experience as a kid, um, my experience working with educators over the course of my career, and not just have a set of talking points about policy, but through, I hope, those stories that I share help get people thinking about policy questions.
Mm. I'll pick up on that Du Bois note. In 1926, Du Bois delivers a speech at the NAACP Spingarn Awards, where it's titled "The Criteria for Negro Art." And in this speech, he's talking about the political economy of knowledge production. What does that mean? He's really talking about what are the stakes for Black authors and creatives to do their work. And what he points to in that speech is that if we don't do it, then in posterity, there will be others who will write our stories. And what will they say of us? What will they say that we thought about and dreamed of, that we contributed to this world, that we created and imagined? Therefore, it is the Black creatives, and this includes writers, it's our job to create. And that means create irrespective of whether or not you get a big check with your book contract. It means create whether or not, you have 1 million followers on social media. It means to create even when the topic that you're talking about isn't the hot thing right now. It is a responsibility that goes beyond you. And I carry that with me as an author, as a Black woman, as an intellectual. And I know that to be true. And John, I haven't shared this with you, but I guess I'll just put it on Front Street now. In reading Teacher by Teacher, you know, I it, it was in your book that I saw the weaving of life history and experience. There's every reason why you shouldn't be sitting here today. And yet and still, I'm in conversation with somebody who was in the cabinet of the United States presidency under the Obama administration, and it would, without you telling your story, I would just take for granted that everything went right for you in your life, and that you had everything lined up, and this was a dream that you had from a kid. Without your story, perhaps I wouldn't think that I could achieve certain goals that I have for myself. So it's in our story. Again, going back to the power of storytelling, whether that's going back to our history and really with care, reading the stories of our elders and ancestors and understanding what they went through, or looking at contemporaries who are producing the work. Buy books from Black authors, and hopefully order them from Black-owned bookstores. Why? Because we're in relationship with one another. And it is through our collective stories and sharing that we are empowering one another, and we're also galvanizing ourselves for the work that we are going to have to do to shore up our democracy.
Mm. You know, that really just touches on a lot of, what I've been thinking about. And one of the things that I think you both mentioned is just the focus around storytelling. right? Like a book can have solely information, as John mentioned, it can be solely policy, and and there's merit. There's times where we need those texts as well. But I do think that there is this, historical legacy, and you both mentioned Du Bois, and we can see this with Du Bois, right? Du Bois, wasn't he was there was there was so much different forms that he was presenting. There was such a focus around storytelling. There were stanzas that would start, chapters in books like Souls of Black Folk. There were so much different ways in which Du Bois focused around storytelling that I think there is something that I think that really pulls through when we think about books, and not only books as just information, but books as ways to tell stories and to tell different kinds of stories. And so, I really appreciate you both speaking on that. And I'm also thinking of, other texts like, Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation, and others that really, focus around thinking about changing through storytelling and narrativization in a way that often we can look at Du Bois's writing and it feels like art. It is art, and so it's also packed with so much information. So, I think that was a very useful and insightful way of thinking about that. So I want to shift also to thinking about some of the ways to combat challenge and also organize to think about how to continue this arc. As Karida, you mentioned in your book, this arc. Um, Really, we're talking about education, but we're talking about so much more. And so I want to think about what are some of the historical lessons that we can learn from, that we can see, that inform the different kinds of strategies that we can employ. Of course, I know we mentioned both inside and outside of the classroom, but I'm looking to hear more specifically around, like, Karida, you also mentioned earlier, like there's an ecosystem, right? And so how can we think about an ecosystem also of organizing and combating these different obstacles and challenges?
Again, Black educators from the past left us the playbook for what this ecosystem or collective impact model looked like. You had a history of Black educators, and this included teachers and administrators and also school founders who were responsible for raising money and marketing their schools and acquiring land to build, boarding schools, to house their student populations. There were models for this, but what we learned from history is that very rarely were folks going it alone.
Mm.
There's a South African um, word that the country built their constitution around called Ubuntu. Ubuntu means each of us needs all of us. And that is the model that historically African American educators have used to move in this way. For example, you had Black women school founders like Mary McLeod Bethune and Charlotte Hawkins Brown and Lucy Craft Laney. They're all, because all of their schools were private schools, they all had to vie for the same private dollars from philanthropies. So they were competing within their ecosystem, and they had every reason to hide information, but they did the exact opposite. Instead, you see at the local, state, and national level, Black teacher associations popping up all across the country. You see with Carter G. Woodson's ASALA, and the conference is going on this week, so shout out to ASALA. Organizations like that served as a backbone to support the whole Black education ecosystem, to share tips on curricula design, to share tips on fundraising, on marketing, on your annual report, on how to financialize your school so that it could be sustainable. All of these were examples of how we saw leaders in this ecosystem using an Ubuntu model. Same thing for our movements. Where do you see the Divide Nine emerge from? Where did Alpha Phi Alpha emerge? Where did Delta Sigma Theta emerge? Where did Alpha Kappa Alpha and so on emerge? College campuses. Where did much of the ruckus of the good trouble of the civil rights movement start? With young people organizing from their schools and college campuses. Shout out to Diane Nash, John Lewis, both Fisk students who get kicked out of school for all their good trouble during that time. So I think when we think of what the school is as more capacious than just an institution where we get our reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's so much more than that. And if we view it in that frame, then we can really activate the power that lies in these institutional infrastructures.
I agree with that. And I'd say part of what I hope we find a way to do is that the students who leave us, even if they don't go into education, understand their moral responsibility to the education of the next generation. I mean, in some ways, we have so much, if you think about just the African American community, so much more power today than 50, 75 years ago, right? So you have, when Karida talks about the need for philanthropy, well, now today, some of the folks writing the check, some of the folks running these major philanthropies, they're African American. That was not true in 1950, but it is true today. Major corporations, CEOs, board members. You think about some of our celebrities who have such incredible resources, artists, athletes. In the civil rights movement, right? Harry Belafonte was taking money that he had made as an artist and investing it in activism with a sense of moral responsibility to the community. One of the things I worry about is I don't know that we have instilled well enough in folks across these different sectors that these attacks that we're seeing on education are a threat to the health of the whole community. And folks, whatever seat they're in, whether they work at, Netflix or they work at JP Morgan, this is the moment for them to step forward and say, I'm going to invest in the education of Black students. I'm going to invest in Black educators. And we need that in this moment. We need a cross-sector alliance.
That's really important. That sort of dovetails with what I was actually, thinking about. Really, it is when we look historically, it hasn't, as you both mentioned, been like siloed, right? There's always been different kinds of coalitions that have been pivotal to different forms of transformation as it relates to education. And I'm thinking about people who might be in the audience with us today, or just people around the country that are really thinking deeply about how to make a change, right? And what they can do in the here and now, what they can, do this week, what they can do next week to really build towards a future where Black minds, Black education can thrive. I'm curious to hear, what you all think about concrete steps that folks can begin taking to really think about how to push towards transforming, what exists today.
Part of it has to be politics, political organizing. And I think, elections have consequences. And we are living with some of those consequences today. And, we've got an election coming up in just over a year that's going to have a huge influence on where we head next as a country. And I say that not as a partisan point. That's just a political science fact. And so our folks organizing, and that doesn't mean just voting, right? That means figuring out who you're going to encourage to run, how you're going to help them, raising money, canvassing, all the things that go into political organizing. I hope we're all thinking about that because the stakes are very high. We should be litigating. And look, a key part of our history of civil rights advancements in this country has been achieved through the courts. And courts are complicated in the moment. The Supreme Court has done a number of things that I'm very disappointed by, but we are seeing courageous judges at different levels standing up for civil rights protections. We need to bring the cases that make it possible for the courts to intervene. So, folks have to, there's the work we can each do. We can each mentor a young person. We can each, we can start those freedom schools in the summer, right? We can do those concrete things at an individual level, but we also, I think, all have to be thinking about what are we doing to try to produce systemic change.
I amen to all of everything that you say, John. And that goes back to this, doing democracy. Like, it's also remembering our power as individual citizens in this country. This is our shit. This country, we the people. Like, that is what the Constitution lays out for us. And if we don't like the direction that the country is going in terms of our educational ecosystem, the policies that are governing that, it is the responsibility of the people to galvanize and push for the change that we want to see. And we have that model with the civil rights movement and other periods in American history. I'll add to your question about what can we do now with just two lessons that I learned from Battle for the Black Mind. Number one is there's a Jamaican saying, small axe fall big tree. That basically means that it's rarely like the one big action that brings about systemic change. It is the 1,001 little things that we could be doing on a daily basis to make that change. And that again reminds us of our power because no, perhaps it's not the first swing that's going to bring that tree down, but you keep going with consistency and the vision to believe that your condition can be different than what it is today. That's what gets us there. So that's one. That's about attending to what's in front of you, playing the short game, and at the same time, to John's point, always playing the long game at the same time. And we can do two things at once. That comes through freedom dreaming. Every movement starts with radical political imagination. Okay, that then moves into setting agendas, and that's across different constituencies. We're a heterogeneous people. We have different interests, and finding those areas where we converge in our interests, that's where you coalition build and move for those systemic policy level changes that we want to see at all levels. There is a model for this. There is a playbook for this. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. But I do think that right now, we're not mad enough.
Yeah, no, I think that's, you both just shared some brilliant, sobering and also hopeful insight. So I appreciate you both for that. And I want to, in the time we have left before we shift to Q&A, I want to do a little bit of envisioning and imagining. And for those who are familiar with my book, I definitely love an imagination exercise. And so let's future cast a bit. What would a world look like where Black students are able to truly thrive look like?
Look, three things that come immediately to mind. One is there should not be any question about whether or not you can go to your neighborhood school and get all the academic foundations you need to be successful in the 21st century economy. Right? You shouldn't be that because you have to live in a certain zip code in order to get that. You shouldn't have to live in a certain neighborhood to be able to take AP classes. You shouldn't have to be in a certain community in order to get a math teacher who can teach you calculus. That should be every school, right? So that's one, just the academic excellence available to all of our kids. Two, I would say, is a sense of self and a sense of place in this country. And that's one of the reasons I'm so terrified by, where we started, Philip, the book bans, the distortion of our history. You have the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. He was making a case for teaching a version of history that almost implied that slavery was like an internship program. He said, "Oh, this is how you could leverage. We should teach students about how the enslaved people could leverage their skills gained through slavery." It's absurd. That's a governor of a major U.S. state saying that. Well, if that's what school's telling you, how are you going to see yourself? How are you going to understand your place in America? So that's the second thing. Is in an ideal world, every young person, Black, Latino, white, Asian, would come away with an understanding of America's history in its fullness and complexity, and would engage with authors who are similarly diverse. And then the third thing I would say is we would have schools where every young person has an adult who knows them and cares about them. Mm-hmm. I remember once reading a study that was done, a survey that was done of students in a high school in Los Angeles. And they asked the kids to name an adult who would be proud of you. And I thought it was such a smart way to think about relationship, because to be proud of you, someone has to really know you, right? They have to be invested in you. And what was heartbreaking was how few young people in this high school could name an adult at school who would be proud of them. We have to fix that. Every kid should have a meaningful relationship. It doesn't have to just be with a teacher. It could be with a counselor, it could be with a coach, but every kid should have that meaningful relationship. If we had schools that did all three of those things, we'd be in a much better place.
Oh, I love that. I'm looking right now at a painting that you can't see on my wall, a painting of Nina Simone, and it has on it a quote where an interviewer asked her, what does it mean to you to be free? And she responded without hesitation, to live without fear. And when you asked your question about us future casting for Black children and parents in the school system, the first thing that comes to mind is safety. I want and envision and believe in a world where every child, including Black children, can walk into their schools with no fear because they are safe. That means physical safety. That means psychological safety. That means safety of their hearts, that their little hearts will be protected because somebody cares about them. And the data bears out in every manner across every axis that is not the case on average. That is not the experience of most Black children, especially in our public schools. That's a civic failing. I also imagine a world in which Black children have a sense of belonging, automatically in every space, at every level of the educational trajectory, from kindergarten through university. John, you mentioned SSFA, Students for Fair Admissions, which was the Supreme Court case that banned race-conscious admissions as one of many factors in the college admissions process. That means of the 40 to 50 factors that admissions councils use, from legacy status to socioeconomic status, on and on and on, race is the one that can no longer be considered. Well, what's implied there? The implication is that because this was framed as a white and Asian American vis-a-vis Black and Hispanic issue, what it implies is that any Black or brown student whose body are on these campuses, especially elite campuses, they took somebody's spot, that they don't belong, that the only reason that they got there is because of their race. Well, I see that bear out in many of my Black students' self-esteem. They move through these universities that they work their butts off to get to, that they absolutely deserve and earn the right to be at, they walk around questioning, do I belong? Am I an imposter? Do my teachers and fellow students want me here? And that's not an experience that I want for anybody's children. I certainly do not want that for Black children. So those are two things at the soul level that I want for Black children to be able to experience safety and belonging in the school space. And we'd see the results around outcomes and test taking and attainment change overnight if we just had those two foundational things.
Thank you both for that. I think that was, very grounding and also allows us to imagine, which I think is important, when we think about Black education and the Black mind and, what a world can look like where Black students, families, parents, teachers can all thrive. So thank you for that. Okay, so we have a bunch of very exciting and interesting questions, and so we can just popcorn them, and we can start with this one. Can you talk a little bit more around what was mentioned before, what it looks like to do democracy day by day, to walk and talk democracy, even if one doesn't consider oneself an activist? And that question's from Clarence.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for that question, Clarence. There are ways that we could be doing democracy in just edifying our own selves on a daily basis so that we can be more effective with our actions on a daily basis. For example, can you name all of the amendments of the Constitution? Then book, we should all just be refreshing ourselves on our civics, right? The Constitution, knowing who is appointed on your local school board, attending meetings if you're able to do that, and just familiarizing yourself with the democratic process of how the education system works at a local level in your own community. Just getting, shoring up that foundation. And I'm sure many of us know something about how our systems work, but we always can be sharpening, our knowledge. And when you know better, you do better. Once you know more about how the process works in your community, you learn who the actors are in your community, who's appointed, and what elections are coming up, what the issues are. You start to see yourself in that process. And it's up to all of us to say, how do I get in where I fit in? For some of us, need to be running for office. Others, it might be pulling out a checkbook and supporting folks who you want to see, take leadership positions. There are many other ways to show up. And I think just having that motto, again, Ubuntu, each of us needs all of us. It's not about measuring, who's doing more or less. It's about really showing up in ways that are authentic and sustainable for you, and bringing the resources that you have into the chat. And that's what it looks like to me to be doing democracy on a daily basis. I will also say, when I say democracy, I'm talking about the sum of us, not just what works for your kid. It's not just about our individual outcomes and safety and attainment. It's really at the community level, so that, I care about what's going on with all the kids in my community are my kids. Every kid in my classroom are all my kids. And I think going back to that ethos also helps us exercise our democratic muscle.
Thank you for that.
That's perfect. It's hard to add to that, but quickly I'd say find 5 friends or family members who aren't registered to vote and get them to register to vote. And if that feels good and that's not too scary, then maybe it's do a night of phone banking for a candidate or for a local organization to try to get folks registered, help folks understand if they are registered, where they need to go to vote. A number of states are putting in additional barriers to make it harder for people to vote, like having to have an ID. So making sure you help people prepare to navigate those things.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Okay, so in the interest of time, there are, definitely some great questions, but I want to get to one from Krishan, which asks, could each of you let the group know how you see your books being utilized in curriculum, and as teaching tools?
I mean, when I started working on the book, my hope was that teacher by teacher would be something that particularly teacher prep programs might use with aspiring teachers, because I try to tell through my story and the stories of educators I've worked with how impactful teachers can be in students' lives and what classroom environments look like that create that transformative impact. So I hope folks will use it in that way.
Thanks for that.
Very similar. I wrote this book for anybody who's interested in the future of education. And if we understand education to be the cornerstone of our democracy, that it's I really hope that current teachers can use the book as an inspiration, just by simply learning the stories of these amazing Black women educators that I feature in the book. It gives you inspiration, and also situates all of us educators on this call, reminding us of our superhero powers, right? And then also young people, I hope that this book will be assigned in classrooms for students at all levels to, through the stories, be able to tease out these themes of resilience, self-determination, freedom dreaming, and also an analysis of power and how power moves, both on the side of oppressive systems and structures, and also on liberatory frames of power building. And there are lessons to be learned on both sides for that. So I really want young people to be able to engage the material as well.
Thank you both for that. And that definitely resonates with my own hopes as well of having a book that can be integrated, into conversations around policing, but also Karida, what you mentioned earlier around like a capacious view of safety was really what I sought out to try to explore in beyond policing as well. And so, yeah, both of your insights around how to use in the context of curriculum resonated with me as well. Okay, thank you both for that brilliant discussion. I wish we had another hour to talk about all of these different ideas. I think we'll shift to Krishan now for wrap-ups. Thank you both again.
Well, I hope that you got as much inspiration from this wonderful discussion as I have. The Legacy Lit team, I just wanted to thank you all, and the Hachette Book Group team and Hachette Academic team and Libraries for helping to put this together. And I hope that you continue to follow the work of all three authors. You can request a desk or exam copy at the link below. You can also follow all of the authors on social media platforms, as well as all the entities, Legacy Lit, the publisher, and the academic team, if you're interested in learning more about the authors coming through the entire company, and just Hachette Book Group in general. We're just publishing some wonderful work. And please follow Legacy Lit on social media as well, if I didn't say that already. Thank you so much for attending. Reach out to us with ideas or questions about the material and how to get it into your schools and into the hands of others. And look forward to seeing you at our next event in the spring. Bye.